So we find ourselves in the early 1830s and you are a young, dashing cavalry officer. Now, of course, your uniform is the most magnificent of the army and your facial hair is so racy that you're bursting bodices at 50 paces. Now, of course, your primary weapon is your big chopper, but you need a good pistol to go with it. So let me introduce what I think is the most magnificent service single-shot muzzle-loading pistol of the lot. This is the model of 1833 and it is of course French. Welcome to the workshop. So before we go into the features of the pistol, because there are actually quite a few, let's briefly consider who it was for. Now, as I said, it was for cavalry officers. So just the fact that it's cavalry means that these were not going to be used very much. The main function of the cavalry was still to go at it with their sabres, swords, or even lances. The fact that it's for officers means they're supposed to be leading by example, so they're even less likely to draw these in battle, because then that would pretty much admitting that they've failed at their job. These are most likely going to be used probably to shoot their own horse, or perhaps to settle a point of honour in some lonely field on a foggy Sunday morning. However, because they are for cavalry officers, these are supposed to be purchased by the officers themselves with their own means. They were usually wealthy gentlemen, and let's say the gun designers allow themselves to put features into these pistols that you would perhaps not expect in a standard trooper's pistol. So as you can see, this is a percussion lock on a percussion pistol, and by the way, water is also wet. Now, the reason I mention it is that it is designed from the ground up as a percussion firearm. It is not a conversion, which is very common for military muzzle loaders. And in fact, if you assume that it was designed probably 1830, 1831, this is actually an extremely early example of a percussion design. The military firearms are actually, in this case, probably about 10 years behind the civilian market. Of course, for hunters, target shooters, and let's not forget duelists, getting that first shot off is of course vitally important under any weather conditions. For the militaries of the world, of course, you've got to consider the cost of either new or conversion firearms. You have to retrain everybody, you have to redesign the ammunition, logistical hell that goes with it. So it actually tended to trickle slowly into specialist firearms first, before then going over to the line infantry. So you're talking wall guns, Jaeger rifles, sharpshooter rifles, officers' pistols, or prestige weapons, if you like. Things that are produced in relatively small numbers, going to trained troops or persons, and the ammunition was produced in very small numbers and wouldn't really have a knock-on effect on logistics. Start off, for example, with France, since this is a French pistol. Their first new percussion firearm is actually a wall gun, huge 1831 pattern breech loader. Then comes this pistol, then comes the sharpshooter rifle of 1837, and the infantry get their first new percussion rifle, or musket I should say, smoothbore still, in 1840. United Kingdom has a similar development slightly later. They have the Brunswick Rifle, comes in mid-1830s. The infantry get first of all a small batch of Lovell pattern muskets in 1838, and then they decide actually they're just going to convert the best muskets to percussion. The US, I must admit I don't know what the chronology is, but I suspect it's similar. They're pretty much all the same. The first state to actually start experimenting with the percussion is the state of Württemberg. I don't know if it was a kingdom, let's just say state. So pre-German state, tiny standing army, relatively wealthy, so it's relatively easy to start dabbling in these new fangled experimental systems. The first standing army to universally adopt the percussion system is actually Saxony from 1835. Again, similar to Württemberg, relatively small army, relatively wealthy. and can switch relatively easily. Prussia, a bit bit bigger. They also sort of close to France, 1831, 1832. They get the first percussion Jaeger rifles, small batches. 1835 they expand a bit more, and then infantry get theirs in 1839. So let's take a closer look at the other features. So those who are into muzzle loaders will probably have immediately said, hang on, this doesn't look like a service pistol, this looks like one of the many luxury percussion pistols of the time. And you'd be absolutely right. This has all the features of the sort of luxury end target or dueling pistols, and even though I cannot prove it, I suspect that Nicolas Noël Boutet, the world-renowned gunsmith, had some kind of influence on this, either directly or indirectly. He actually dies the year that this comes out as a official pattern, but of course he may have had some influence towards the end of his life. He was actually the artistic director of the Imperial Arms manufacture in Versailles for a brief period before becoming the Director General of all the Imperial Arms manufacturers and repair depots in 1798. And he continues that until 1818, and then continues with his civilian gunsmithing activities. So it would have been at the end of his life, but I think the similarities between this and what he had produced prior are too close to ignore. So we have, in typical target pistol of the era form, we have a flared base here to as a sort of hand rest. Nice curved grip, checkering. We have an extra finger support here on the trigger guard, and you need that because although this curve is very pleasing to the eye, it does mean that the pistol tends to rotate when under recoil, so it's nice to have a little brace there. These are actually a mixed blessing because it's very easy to apply too much pressure or pull the shot left and right. So if you're trying to use this as a target pistol, it's very difficult to get a consistent shot using that spur. Now it is a sighted barrel. Sights are actually pretty good. And it is also a Damascus twist barrel. Now this is utterly unnecessary, so you can tell this is an officer's pistol because they just decided to give it a big heavy Damascus barrel just because, and they can afford it anyway. It is also slightly flared, you can see that. I'm guessing this is more of a fashion statement than anything else. But it does mean that you can have a slightly shorter front sight post. Not a bad thing when you're pulling this in and out of saddle buckets. And when in use, I also found it's quite good to get a good grip on it when you're trying to load. Hashtag that's what she said. You will note also that the barrel is very rifled. This is a 48 groove micro rifling, which is quite astonishing for the time. And this explains why it has this very fancy ramrod here. So it has some nice embellishments on there, but it also has this brass ring at the widest point. That is simply to protect the rifling when ramming. Now, this is especially important because this has something in there that means that you are going to be hammering the ball down there with quite some force. So they quite rightly put this in because it'd be quite easy to scrape down the side of the rifling, and you don't want to have that steel against steel. So what is going on in the barrel? Well, this extremely long breech plug is a clue. This has what is known as a Delvigne breech system, and it was one of the first attempts to accelerate loading while still taking advantage of rifling to increase accuracy. Now, increasing accuracy is of course relative. The alternative to these is of course a smoothbore pistol shooting a very undersized ball inside a paper wrapper, maybe. So any increase is going to be significant. So we have the rifling here, and this is what it looks like on the inside. So The idea is that we have a powder chamber which contains all the powder, so that when you're hammering down the ball sits directly on this shoulder, and then you give it a couple of hefty whacks with the ramrod. So the ball has to be naked, so unpatched, and then of course it grips the rifling, and you will get some spin of the projectile and then a slight increase in accuracy. So as I was saying, this is why this has this brass band, because you're going to be needing to put quite a lot of force on the ball when you're seating it. Now, downside of course is the ball is deformed, it's no longer spherical. This is one I shot into a pile of rags. So you can see the face here has been dented in. The rear as well, here's the shoulder, powder chamber here, so it pokes into the powder chamber a bit, inevitable. And here you can see the grooves from the rifling. So it does work. It needs to be soft lead, otherwise it just won't expand at all. I know some people who've accidentally put a little bit of tin or something in there, or leftover lead, and just even a little bit of increase means that these just don't bite the rifling. So aerodynamically this isn't the best, but it's better than a smoothbore. So the other major feature that this pistol has is the first appearance of the ubiquitous French back action military lock, and you find this on all the newly built French percussion service rifles and muskets and pistols. But it makes its first appearance on this pistol. This is actually a second pattern. It's slightly longer than the first one, but mechanically it's the same. These are known as platines à la Ponchara, after its inventor. And very clever system. It's only fixed by one screw to the lock counterplate here, and otherwise it's simply locked in with this little hook, which goes into a hole in this stud in the back here. Despite appearances, this does not weaken the stock. This was one of the major concerns, particularly from the British side, about these kind of locks, but I've seen very, very few stocks that have been broken at the wrist here due to cracks starting around the lock plate area. And the lock itself is very, very simple. Basically they've eliminated the sear spring because they use the tail end of the mainspring. With the, let's say, normal forward action locks, you have this at the front end, and then you need a second little spring for the sear, which is towards the rear. Now everything is compact. The rest of the components are basically the same as any other percussion or even a flintlock lock mechanism. What they have done, which is quite clever, is that they've integrated the hammer stop inside the lock. So this sort of fishtail shaped bit here is an extension of the tumbler, and it means that when the hammer falls, it's going to butt up against this surface here. Of course, when you're actually firing, this is of no consequence, like so. But if for some reason you have removed the nipple for cleaning, or whatever other reason, and the hammer drops, the hammer is not going to smash into the barrel here or this area of wood, which is relatively thin. So that was a clever thing. Usually with the sort of forward normal action locks, the hammer has got a flat surface that's going to strike against the lock plate itself. So the problem doesn't exist. But this of course doesn't have that, so they found a nice clever solution. So now you know how the Delvigne principle works, I'm sure two questions have come to mind. One is, how do you load it? And then, how do you clean it once you've shot it? So we'll address the first question. Now, if you remember the cross section, there is this powder chamber which contains all the powder. So you have to get that powder in there when muzzle loading, which presents a bit of a problem. Now, the reason you don't want any powder on the annular seat, it's not going to be dangerous, but of course when you're hammering the ball down, you just end up crushing the powder and you don't get the expansion and a good grip on the rifling. so defeats the object really. Now there is an official way of loading this. Whether this was used in the field, in action, probably not. In that case you just throw powder and ball down there and shoot as quickly as you can. Bear in mind again, this is an officer's pistol. It was probably loaded prior to the battle, and if it was used, it was used and probably not reloaded, unless you went circled round the back of the lines and then you had time to do it properly. So the proper method is, first of all, you open the little compartment here in the butt here. This has a little plug which is quite clever. There's a sling swivel here which when it's pulled out rotates freely, and then when you put it in, it engages the screw, and then you can open it up. They knew what they were doing. And in there is a little powder measure. Now, of course, you would have two of these pistols. They came in pairs. One would have this powder measure in it, and the other one would have two replacement percussion nipples. So, this little powder measure has a little compartment in there which is sized for the powder charge. So 1 gram of powder. That doesn't sound like very much, but you are shooting a thumping great big ball, and well, you're going to shoot at what, 5-10 meters maximum at someone else, so it doesn't matter if this isn't going very fast, it is going to hurt. So you load this to the brim, take out your ramrod, screw it onto the end, and then you place the pistol on top of the ramrod and then inverse it. The powder is then transferred from the measure into the powder chamber, and then you can throw down the loose ball, there's no patch, and give it a good rodding, which I'm not going to do because then I won't be able to get it out. So that is the official method. If I want to use the official method and I want to screw in and unscrew the powder measure, I've made myself a big heavy brass ramrod here. On the handle end here I have bored out a little powder measure which is matches the dimensions of the powder chamber, and on the other end I have a ramming head which has a spherical recess that matches the bullet, so that hopefully it won't deform too much when I ram it. That is if I want to do it the traditional way. If I want to cheat, what I've done is I've made this, which you'll see in the shooting video, which is coming, I promise. This is just an aluminium powder tube. There are two eyes in aluminium. On the end here I've put a little ring which matches the dimensions of the bore, so that when I put it in there it's directly aligned with the powder chamber and I can just pour powder straight in the top there. So that is for shooting. What about cleaning? Well, we have this stepped chamber which presents a bit of a problem. I don't know what the official cleaning tool was, if any. I did think of maybe producing a jag which matched the profile, so a big diameter for the bore and then an extension for the powder chamber, but I thought that maybe two tools will do the job better than one combination tool which will do a meh job. So I have a big chunky jag here with a scraper, and likewise one for the powder chamber, and they work well. They keep the bore nice and clean. So while we're on the subject of accessories, when I was doing my research on this pistol I came across a prototype for a bullet puller which would also fit in the compartment here. So I guesstimated the dimensions and tried to reproduce it. So this is the bullet worm, as it's called. Now this should be a double helix, but sorry, I can't cut that. In fact, I didn't even cut this. This is just an adapted wood screw. And this screws in to the ramrod, of course. Now also the conundrum was finding out what this thread is. It's some kind of mystery thing. It's not imperial, it's not quite metric. The closest I got was M6, but it's not quite. There's a little bit of a wobble still. Anyway, this is what it looks like, and we can test it on a lead ball. Let's see if I can try not to drill into my finger. It actually bites into the ball pretty quickly. So you can see there, it's biting in there. And you get a pretty good grip. It hasn't gone in very far, but it'd be difficult to pull out. And I suspect that the problem was once you pulled it out, that so the end of the ramrod and this bit would be tightly screwed together. You couldn't easily undo it, or likewise between this bit and the ball. So in this case it's coming off there. I'm guessing that's why they have this through hole and these two little pins, which meant that you could insert them in each end like so, and then you've got leverage to unscrew it again, because there's no hole in this end. So yeah, this was a bit of experimental archaeology. To the range. So as you saw, the target is respectable. It is not a target pistol despite its appearances, and it basically means you're guaranteed to hit a rider at 25, and frankly I took this out to 50 meters as well, and the spread was only very slightly bigger. So even at 50 you've got a good chance of hitting a rider. In both cases it was a case of aiming for the horse to hit the rider, as is often the case with these service pistols. But certainly it was far better than one could do with the standard smoothbore troopers pistols. Now I know, before any of you smoothbore shooters kick up, that they can be very accurate at 50 meters, but in any case it requires a specific diameter ball and patch combination, lube, and all sorts, which I acknowledge. However, I'm interested in what the service ammunition will do. And there's clearly a difference between a rifled and unrifled for quick loading. Now, the disadvantage of the Delvigne system is obviously the deformation of the ball. It's no longer a sphere. It's not so bad in the pistol. I was actually surprised how little it deforms with the bullet that I managed to recover. Obviously, there's a limited amount of force you can apply on this pistol. You're going to be putting the toe here against something, and if you apply too much pressure, it is going to split, no matter how good the wood of the grip is. It's a different story with the rifles, because the Delvigne system was also used on quite a lot of rifles. The 1837 French Jaeger rifle, then a series of wall guns, which are massive, 1838, 1840, 1842. So they're massive rifles, around 20 millimeter caliber, and you've got a huge, long, heavy iron ramrod with a big head on it as well. So you can imagine that the ball is probably ending up mushroom shaped by the time it's fully loaded. So obviously not the best for accuracy, and they tried to mitigate this with an intermediate step by putting the ball on a wooden sabot, which improved things a bit. Ultimately, this system dies away pretty quickly and is replaced firstly by the pillar breech system and then the Minier, like everybody else. Now, the Delvigne system was not limited to France. A lot of the neighbouring countries sort of followed the fashion, as it were. The most notable is the Austrian 1844 Kammerbüchse, which is a beautiful rifle, which I owned a long time ago, and it shot very well. Had a sort of same kind of rifling, but it was 12 groove. Also the ramrod with a brass collar around it. Really, really nice. In fact, Cap and Ball has done a video on shooting his very, very accurate system, with, if you bear in mind the inherent disadvantages with the deformation of the base. So I think I've exhausted all the information I have, and I'm sure some of you are asleep now. Thank you very much to those who are still awake. Thank you, of course, for your support on whichever platform you wish to follow us on, and I shall see you next time with another black powder treasure, I hope. Bye!